There was one particular afternoon when the city, Christmas was saved for the month of October. The kind of afternoon when the last bit of heat. The year rests in the light at a low angle, transforming everything it touches into something that is worth keeping in mind. The taxi windows, the structures, metallic structures of the works, and the faces turned on top of people who stopped only for a second to notice that the station, it was changing. It was exactly that kind of thing at dusk. The chestnut leaves were falling in slow spirals, a golden amber, capturing the last glimmer before it to settle against the marble pavement outside the amethyst. The restaurant occupied the ground floor of an imposing tower on the coastal road, its frosted glass facade gleaming warmly against the avenue that it was getting dark. A doorman in a grey overcoat, lead, kept the entrance open with a practiced immobility, waving to each guest that arrived. In the manner which diplomats wave to each other, others, recognizing the presence without giving nothing in return. Valeria Horta, she didn't look at him. She crossed the street, already holding your phone at the door, already reading the message thread of your CFO, already calculating the minutes that could be spared before call at 8:30 from the night with the office in Sill. Behind of her, moving cautiously, deliberate act of a child trying not to be noticed, her son was there. Eduardo, he was 11 years old. He was wearing a blue blazer, the seafood that served him very well, type of clothing that spoke of tailors and not from childhood. Her brown hair, his hair was combed to one side. His hands, they were in his pockets, and he went into the amethyst in the way it entered in most places, quietly, hoping not to disappoint anyone. He was good at that. I've been practicing ever since. I was old enough to understand that her mother moved around the world in the speed that required people to. Her surroundings accompanied her or left the path, and that a child with needs was a variable that I hadn't completely resolved it yet. That wasn't a criticism. It was simply a fact about architecture of their life together, in the same way that the angle of a building is not a criticism of the building. He loved his mother. Eduardo was also 11 years old, beginning to understand that love and tranquility were different things, and that their apartment on the 42nd floor, with 3 bedrooms in the Area Preta neighborhood, and with the view that guests always they admired it, it was full of the first and one, slightly scarce of the second. The meter there, he led to a corner table near the window. Valeria's usual place under a crystal chandelier, white linen and a small arrangement of white roses that no one would ever touch it. Valeria, he sat down and placed the phone with the screen facing up. He reached up to the side of the fork and picked it up. Wine list. The amethyst menu. It had 12 pages and changed with the seasons. Valeria had already eaten there 40 or 50 times and asked for the same 3 sessions. Every time. She liked it. The efficiency of familiarity. I liked to know what something would be even before arrive at the table. Certainty in almost all areas of your life. It was a problem to be solved in, instead of an experience to be lived. Eduardo sat down in front of her and did not. He said nothing. He had already read the menu, twice. He placed it on the table. He looked at the roses, he looked at them with her own hands, she looked at the couple twice. Tables beyond. Laughing at something that was there, what happened that day. The woman, reaching out to touch the arm of man in an easy and instinctive gesture. It was the kind of gesture one makes when, stop thinking about whether you should do it or not. Eduardo was observing the table while sighed. The man at the next table had the type of face that was once younger, and she hadn't forgotten that. Dark circles under her eyes, steady eyes, a jaw that he had been growing a beard for a few days without asking, sorry. His jacket was green canvas, olive, the kind you buy in a store, of military articles, and is used until she knows the shape of her shoulders. He had rolled up his sleeves to the elbow, and on his left forearm, her shirt cuff was half closed. The edge of a scar that seemed not it was done by accident. Its name, it was Diogo Martins. He was 38 years old. He was a widower and the father of a 7-year-old girl called Lorena, who currently explained to him with enormous authority that the spaghetti was better than penny because it was more fun to roll it up. Diogo didn't. I had planned to come to Amethyst that day. Night the second-year class from Lorena had performed in a small recital at the school that afternoon. 20 minutes of uncertain recorder and a solo, surprisingly confident violinist of a boy named Miguel. Lorena, she stayed in the background wearing a yellow dress, and he applauded so much by everyone that his hands, they turned pink afterwards, walking towards house, or if she stopped at the corner of avenue and looked at the restaurant with her windows let in warm light and said, simply put, "It looks like a place of celebration, Dad." He didn't argue, he did a mental calculation about his bank account and decided that some nights are worth the price. Ways that cannot be inserted into a spreadsheet of expenses. You can't argue with physics, Dad, said Lorena. She had the coloring of her late mother, hair, red heads, light freckles on the bridge of the nose, and his father's frankness. He was the type of child who made eye contact when he was talking and expecting you to do the, yes indeed. Diogo was cutting the spaghetti in shorter lengths on her plate, a service that she did not request, and not, I would recognize it, because accepting help would undermine the argument about the rotation of mass. I'm not arguing, he said him. Oh, I'm just making it controllable. It's the same thing. She picked up the fork and tried a spin, dramatic. Half the mass fell on the white tablecloth. See, he said, and he handed her a clean napkin to clean up the little mess. Eduardo, he observed all of that. He saw Diogo. Lean over and wipe the sauce off your chin. From Lorena, without ceremony, without irritation, he saw Diogo listen, really listen, putting down her own fork when Lorena changed the subject to something about a caterpillar that he had found at school. He saw the two existing in the same space of the way people do when they are completely comfortable with each other. The other, without haste, without acting. The Eduardo's phone was also on the table. No one had instructed him to put it there. He had put it there because it was what was done at the meals in your house. Or you would put the phone in the table and existed in its vicinity. He hadn't looked at the device for 4 minutes, which was a personal record. Valeria was still reading the topic. Messages, the blue glow of the screen reflected in their pupils. Mum, he called. She looked up. Something about his voice had a quality that she rarely listened. It wasn't necessary. Exactly, but something adjacent to that. A kind of longing directed towards outside. What is it, darling? She asked. He asked. His fingers still hovering about the virtual keyboard. He nodded, slightly tilting his head towards the table. Next to him. He looks like a real Father D, said Eduardo in an almost whisper. Imperceptible. Valeria Horta was not a woman who... She let herself be caught off guard. She had already negotiated with sovereign wealth funds of investment, had already laid off members of the council in their own rooms of meeting. He had already sat down at the table with people who tried to intimidate her and overcame each of them with his cold intelligence. But his 11-year-old son years saying those 5 words with that particular expression in his face, it was something for which his defenses, they weren't in position. She landed the phone slowly. The silence between they became dense, filled only by the distant sound of cutlery clinking on porcelain and by the murmur of others. Conversations that suddenly seemed irrelevant. Can we sit with them, Eduardo? He asked. The question was asked with the hesitant caution of someone who already knew. The answer would probably be no. He was already preparing to accept the refusal. He was already organizing his expression in something neutral and compliant, and a mask that he wore to protect to himself and to her from the disappointment. Valeria, she looked at him for a moment, seeing the shadows under her eyes that she hadn't noticed in the morning. Then she looked at the table next to him. He saw Diogo cutting the dough, without looking down because he had already done so. 100 times, and his hands knew the angle. Saw Lorena telling a story, with hands, elbows on the table, completely lacking self-awareness. He saw the basket of bread between them, half empty, the torn edges of the loaves suggesting that they were eating, and we've been chatting for quite a while, without any rush. Something. There was no phone next to Diogo was at the table. There was no folder. Documents, no security guard was waiting near the door. And there was nothing there. A picture that resembled dinners where Valeria had grown up, or at dinners which she had replied to her son without intention. Efficient dinners, scheduled, accompanied by the buzzing below is a number of unread messages. One thing, which she had been telling herself for 2 years that I was going to fix, that next she would schedule more nights like this month. That Eduardo was fine, that he was resilient, like the children of parents. Successful people develop independence. That started to sound very silently, which was actually an excuse. Valeria had a brilliant mind for strategy. She was able to hold 8 competing variables at once and classify them by impact. I was able to see 3 moves ahead in a negotiate and position yourself in the room. She never knew about all that machinery, cognitive, and apply their intelligence to the question of what your son needed, because applying it would mean acknowledging that the answer was something she didn't. I was providing it. It took 30 seconds, maximum. The calculation is complete. He accepted the result. However illogical that it might seem to yourself, professional. She stood up. It wasn't a gesture, dramatic. She simply pushed He leaned back in his chair and stood up with the elegance that success had given her. And then he walked 3 steps to the table, adjacent, and stopped. Diogo looked at above. He had a particular readiness. From someone trained to notice unexpected approaches, but the expression was not defensive, just attentive. He saw a woman who exuded power, but whose eyes carried a sudden and strange vulnerability. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "Valeria, MQ, my son would really like that. To join you if they feel comfortable with it. I understand, that's an unusual request." The restaurant, the noise around them did not stop audibly. But something changed in the ambient attention of room. A man 2 tables back lowered her cup a few centimeters. A woman wearing a white dress, she stopped in the middle of a sentence. The sommelier, who moved in heading towards a table in the back. He stopped and he remained motionless in a way that was almost imperceptible and entirely visible to anyone familiar with etiquette of the place. Valeria Horta was known there, not from the way that requires the presentation, but of the way certain people become part of a city's geography. His presence was noticeable, as can be seen in the weather. Diogo Martins looked at her for a second, his eyes assessing the sincerity behind the request. Diogo, he looked at Eduardo, who was still there, sitting at the other table with his hands crossed in her lap, observing with a contained expectation, which started the heart of anyone who cared. Attention. "Yes," said Lorena, with the volume of those who were waiting precisely because of that kind of magical thing. It could happen. Diogo almost smiled. "Of course," he said, "there's always room for more." 2. Eduardo crossed the space of 1 meter between the tables at a speed who immediately tried to disguise it as a casual walk. He sat down, Lorena stood in front of him, and she looked at him with the frank, evaluative, and direct approach of a 7-year-old child, driving a personality assessment. "Do you like spaghetti or penny pasta?" she asked, without wasting time with formal introductions. "Penny," she replied. Eduardo, a little intimidated by the girl's energy. Lorena considered the answer for a moment, frowning nose. "Okay," she said, seemingly deciding to ignore this character flaw. "I am Lorena. My father is Diogo. He used to be a doctor, but now he only take me to school and make pancakes." "Lorena," Diogo interrupted in a tone of a mild warning. "What?" "It's true," she retorted before. Go back to Eduardo again. "What is your name?" "Eduardo. What does your mother do?" "Runs a company," he replied, boy glancing sideways at Valeria. "What kind of company?" Lorena insisted. "Technology, like iPads, I think." Valeria interjected, sitting next to Diogo, while the waiter quickly rearranged the table. "Cool," said Lorena. And then she changed, immediately to a more important. If Eduardo had seen the film about a robot dog and I found the ending sad. In 40 minutes, the two were undergoing a thorough analysis about animated films. Valeria and Diogo sat at the ends, opposite sides of the now shared table, and they watched their children talking. "As a good kid," Diogo said. "I said it in the way I would say something. It was true, not as flattery, just as a clinical observation." "He is a quiet boy," said Valeria. She heard the difference between those two statements as soon as he uttered them. "He is good also. I don't always know what's there." What was happening to him? Diogo looked at Eduardo, who was now leaning towards across the table, explaining something for Lorena with both hands. Gesturing, and he seems to know. "Exactly what is happening with said Diogo. "Maybe he just doesn't. I have had enough people asking him." Valeria looked at Diogo. He wasn't looking at her. He was watching the two children. Had the particular quality of someone who says difficult things without trying, to make them sound like attacks. He doesn't usually open up like this. She commented, feeling a pang of jealousy mixed with relief. "The children they open when no one is watching." "Doing that," said Diogo. "When the pressure comes out, is there pressure?" He asked this with a calmness that disarmed. Valeria hesitated, and then, before he could be diplomatic, he said, "No, be diplomatic. I really want to." "I know." Diogo sighed lightly. "There's always pressure when someone is this is also very important to you." "Far away," he said so himself when they are physically in the same room. "The children, they can smell them from a distance." He paused, letting the words fall into place. To settle down. "It's not broken. He's just waiting." "What are you waiting for?" Valeria asked. His voice was almost a whisper. "To find out if it's worth wanting the things." Diogo finally looked at her. "To find out if the desire will be attended to." This is proof that they are running all the time. They don't have, there's no language for that, but the test is always running in the background. Valeria, he looked at Eduardo. He was gesturing with their hands in the way that he rarely did it. Widely, without self-awareness, her animated face, and it shone brightly under the restaurant lights. It seemed like a different version of itself, even, or perhaps the version that had been there all the time, waiting like Diogo, he said. "You to find out if it was safe to appear." She felt something for which I didn't have a precise word. It wasn't guilt. Guilt was too static. It was something more like a determination, for he had just found his object, particular. In the same way that water finds the shape of the container into which it is poured. Eduardo looked up amidst the. In conversation with Lorena, her eyes met. From her mother for half a second and smiled. An unprotected smile, without second's intentions. The type of smile that Valeria, I hadn't seen him for longer than I wanted to. admit it. She was the first to deflect the look, feeling a lump in her throat. The amethyst environment seemed to have transformed from a business temple into a human refuge. And for the first time, for years, Valeria hadn't been thinking about it. Watch or on the international call that, she was waiting for her. The man at the central table. His name was Paulo Vanderlei. He was 51. Years, it was the second generation in the sector. Financial and took its place with the comfortable sound of someone who never, he had to tone it down in public, because public spaces always they belong. He had noticed Valeria when she had arrived. He always noticed Valeria, not because he admired her, but because she represented a category of person for whom he had been losing ground. Silently for 15 years, monitoring her movements. It was a habit that had become ingrained. Reflection. When he saw her get up and walk to the next table, and when she processed what she was seeing, a woman who could buy that restaurant without checking the bank balance, and choosing to sit with a man in a canvas jacket, which probably came by subway or bus. Something in his expression contorted. Is that the vegetable garden? One of his colleagues? She murmured.
Yes,
Said Paul.
what is she? What are you doing?
He said this in a projected volume. To travel through the air. I think the Helios now hiring waiters directly to the tables. The two colleagues laughed in that way. Disciplined men who learned to perform entertainment under command. The waiter. Closest to me was a young man named Estevan. After 3 months on the job, I was approaching Diogo's table to check the new additions. He heard the Paul's comment. He downplayed it. I stepped slightly. He changed his route. He headed towards the kitchen, and when he returned, he was more attentive to Paul's table and less considerate of theirs. They were small things. It's the kind of small things. Things that accumulate in the texture of a night and can ruin the spirit of any celebration. Lorena didn't notice, because I was 7 years old and I had more things important to manage. That is, convince Eduardo that tiramisu, choice of top dessert, and that the chocolate mousse that he was considering this showed a lack of understanding, fundamental to the menu. Diogo noticed. Everything? Valeria noticed what he noticed. Does this happen often? He asked, referring to the comments malicious and to the change in treatment. Often enough, he said. Diogo. He wasn't looking at. Paulo was refilling his glass with water from Lorena. That bothers me, she said, and remained silent. I was surprised to discover that he was serious. Don't let him advise. They need that you get bothered. And that's the point. Principle. The moment you react, you gave them control of your night. Dad, said Lorena. She had heard something in the tone of the room. The children's ears are in tune with the hostility of adults with remarkable accuracy. Why are they angry? They don't. They're angry, said Diogo. They forgot why they came here. He reached out and touched the top of his hand. Focus on your spaghetti. I've already finished my spaghetti, so focus on your tiramisu. Lorena, he accepted this and turned to Eduardo to continue explaining the arc, the emotional impact of the robot dog movie. Valeria, she looked at Diogo across the table, had built a company with 4,000 employees. I had navigated through relentless condescension that the industry was targeting women who, they refused to be managed. I had developed a set of precise responses to hostility, effective ice cold. And here was that one, man in his olive green jacket, deflecting his disdain with 2 sentences and a glass of water. Sometimes people, they forget what really matters, he said, she repeating what he had said to Lorena.
Yes,
He said. I was one of them. For a while. Her phone lit up at 8:17 of the night. It wasn't a message, it was a call by Marcos Vanderlei, its director, financial, a man who communicated by text with 90% of human beings in her life and that it connected in real time. Only when the text would insufficient. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me," she said. "We have a situation." The voice of Marcos had the quality of something controlled under pressure. A strong gate, Capital withdrew its position this afternoon. They did not register the disclosure until 30 minutes ago. The market is closed, but the aftermarket figures are falling, Valeria. That's significant. How significant? She asked, feeling the cold creep up through her, your spine. 11% in 3 hours, and there's an article about it. Heaters leaving at 9. Someone handed it over. The internal review memorandum of third quarter. The third review memorandum quarter? The one she had presented to advice given 6 weeks ago, which contained future guidance on acquisition in yours, which shouldn't be public because another month. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Who knew about the memo? Just the advice, complete without observers. There are 9 people, I'm including you. Put everyone on a call at 9:30. Don't say why, just put them there. She stood up, moving away a few steps from the table. And leave the legal aspects to I'm ready. I want Carla, specifically. Done. Are you coming here? I will be. Then at 9, she hung up the phone and stayed. The property is closed for a moment. The restaurant, the conversation continued around him. Lo, the clinking of glass. The heat, the atmosphere of a room full of people having normal nights. She was aware of this, in the way that one is aware of time through a window. Valeria had built the dynamic Helios of 11 people in a converted loft up to an organization of 4,000 people with she has offices in 7 cities, made public with an assessment that she made the analysts look foolish. Had navigated through 2 attempts to a hostile takeover and an investigation governmental, but she hadn't been in 15 for years, betrayed from within. That was the part that weighed on his chest, in a different way from the exhibition financial. The stocks would recover. She knew she had the reserves and the script. But someone at his table had decided destroy something she had built. The symptoms came on gradually, and then once the room contracted slightly. At the edges, the sound becoming loud, too much for space. A heat wave in his chest that was not physical. She had had panic attacks before. 6 times in the last 4 years, always triggered by this combination specific factors. Stacked betrayal. Regarding financial threats. Stacked on the knowledge that she was not in control, she placed a hand on the backrest. He sat down from a nearby chair and breathed. No, that was enough. He heard a voice beside him. Sighed low, calm, no alarm. Sit down. It wasn't a question and it wasn't a suggestion. It was the tone of someone who had said those 2 words in high-risk moments times, though enough for them to become a clear and immediate instruction. Diogo had the chair behind her before that she would process that he had moved. She sat down. He crouched down beside her. One hand on the arm of the chair, without touch her. Look at me, he said.
Right here, are you okay?
I know that. I'm fine, she said, but her voice was thinner than I wanted. Well then, prove it. Breathe in 4 steps. He held her gaze. She breathed in. Hold for 4 seconds. Release. In 6. Good again, 3 cycles, then the room stopped contracting. The heat in his chest receded into something controllable. He checked her pulse. On the wrist, 2 fingers practiced, efficient. And then he sat down on the heels and waited. I'm fine, he said. She finally did. Are you okay? He agreed, standing up. But you need to eat something before going where she wants it to be going. She looked at. He was already moving back. To the table, pulling the bread basket. To her side. He hadn't done her a spectacle of none of that.
Where did you learn that?
She asked. At my old job, he said. Him. Lorena had witnessed the entire exchange with a child's focused attention that understands that something important has just happened. Weather forecast. Daddy fixed you, he said. Valeria with the tone of someone recounting the story. Lorena took her spoon. He had to fix the people very quickly when they were badly injured, like in the army. Lorena, Diogo said softly. It's a secret, she said reasonably. You're no longer in the army. Valeria looked at Diogo. He was looking at the coffee and its expression. It had the qualities of someone standing still. Door of a room which no one else can enter. Surgeon in combat, he said after a moment. I said it the way you say it. One job title that belongs to a previous version of himself. 2 missions. The third would be a post of instructor in natal. But then she became ill. Clara was Lorena's mother. Valeria didn't ask and he didn't offer. More than that, what didn't he say? What it carried in the silences, particularities of men who compressed, that the mourning was due to the fact that Clara had been pediatric nurse and had only 34 years since diagnosis. She had spent the last 8 months of her life ensuring that Lorena had memories good enough to build a life revolves around them. She had made Diogo promise 3 things: take Lorena to every summer, read to her all the ocean nights, and not spend the rest of your life in a war zone. He had served 2 of the 3 promises with confidence, and the third imperfectly, which I thought she would have understood. When she died, he continued. Lorena had 4 years. I left the army. He took the coffee. People always say that as if it were a difficult decision. It wasn't. It was the only possible decision. Eduardo he stayed quiet. Look, he was listening. The way children hear when adults talk about things that don't they have clean edges. Do you miss that? From medicine. Diogo, he considered the question honestly. Sometimes I miss clarity. In surgery. There is a right way and a wrong way. Or you either do it on time or you don't. There is no ambiguity. Diogo continued. And that? Valeria pointed to the table. The jacket, simple life. That's not clear, but Lorena is there. It's not a trade, it's just as things are. Eduardo looked at the mother. She was looking at Diogo and the expression was that she was doing something. I hadn't chosen. It was becoming briefly, quietly raw. She had spent 15 years in rooms where people told him how much they were worth. He had become a master at evaluating these allegations. If you had never met a man that described the sacrifice without seeking credit, Eduardo had absorbed the connection. His mother's phone number too. Not the content, but the quality of its immobility. Then he met that immobility. It was a particular absence in which his mother, he would come in when something at work happened. It became a problem. The panic attack. Eduardo didn't announce himself. He came from in a way that always came from within, without warning. A sudden and total persuasion of that something was wrong, that there was a rare effect, and that he had become detached from himself. Eduardo, he didn't announce what was happening. He just stood there, motionless. Valeria recognized the signal, a quality of holding his breath. Eduardo, his voice came out. Too sharp, she heard it shudder, and overcorrection made things worse. Your hands hovered over him, though, and every time that she was trying to reach him during those episodes, it made him more agitated. She didn't understand why, and that wasn't it. Understanding made her feel at impotence without language. Diogo moved your chair around the corner of the table, and she sat down next to Eduardo, not in front of him. Hey, he said. His voice, it would become something private and direct. Eduardo looked, his eyes were scared. Have you done this before? Diogo asked. It's not a question, it's a recognition. Do you know what it is? It's your body. Triggering an unnecessary alarm, play now. Let's turn it off. Can you do something for me? A small nod of head. Place your feet flat on the ground. Feel the ground. This is here now. Look around and tell me. 5 things you can see. The eyes. Eduardo's head of roses moved. The roses, he said. His voice was thin. Ah, the glass of water, the candle, the menu on that table and your jacket. Well, 4 things that you can feel it. The chair, mine hands, my feet on the floor, the table. Well, 3 things you can hear. Eduardo, he listened attentively. Conversations. The music, someone's fork. 2 things. That you can smell. The food and its smell of bread. I think it's something you can to taste. Duff from before. Diogo that he watched for a moment. His breathing, it's normal, he said. The alarm he hung up. Down? Eduardo's shoulders, they dropped 5 cm. His hands relaxed. He let out the long sigh that comes at the end. About something that happened. Yes, he said. That's the training. If you practice the enough, you can do it anywhere. Place. School. Airplane, it doesn't matter. Diogo, he didn't change his tone of voice. It was firm as the floor. Eduardo looked at it for a moment. Then he leaned to the side and he rested his head briefly on the arm of Diogo. It wasn't exactly a hug, but it lasted. 3 seconds was enough. Lorena watched everything attentively. Solemnity that he reserved for things important. It also has these alarms sometimes, she said to no one in particular. Dade always knows what to do. Valeria, she was very quiet. She turned to therapists' reports, had read books, he had asked for strategies at school. But when the moment arrived, she forgot everything. Because he was afraid, and his fear, it became sharp. And the crudeness was the key. Wrong for that lock. He needed someone to show him that. I didn't expect it to be shown by a stranger at a shared table by accident. Valeria told Eduardo that I needed to take him to the driver and that I would have to go home with the housekeeper. Mrs. Pola. That night, she said. I'm sorry, as if really feel. Eduardo nodded, he put on his blazer and shook Diogo's hand. He shook hands. Truly a gesture of solemnity that made something in the room seem formal and correct. Same time next time, Tuesday, Lorena asked Eduardo. We won't be coming here every Tuesday, he said. Eduardo, you should, she said simply. Valeria gave instructions to the driver and he went back inside. Diogo was still there, at the table. He hadn't asked her to come back, and she hadn't said she would return. But he sat down. Tell me what's going on, he said. Not because I want advice. I just haven't said it out loud yet. He listened. She explained everything in 4 minutes. The removal of Stronggate, the story of Huters, the leaked memo to the board of administration. She watched his face while he was speaking, and his face was organizing information in the way that trained minds can do it. The Stonegate withdrawal and the leak are the same event, he said. I know that the Stonegate doesn't make a move like that. Without a reason to believe that the action, it has already peaked. They needed that. The story was ready before they leave. This means that the memo it was promised to routers a week ago, maybe 2. He swirled the cup of cafe. Whoever leaked it is holding back actions, no. Disclosed or someone connected to that, where is the person? Valeria had arrived at that's a version of that conclusion, but listen. Structured in that analytical way, without the adrenaline rush of personal exposure, it made everything more usable. How do you know how to think like that? She asked. He looked at her intently. I spent 6 years planning operations in environments where someone on our side was always potentially committed. You stop asking who would do that and starts asking who had access, the right time and the personal encouragement. He paused. Who on your board has had a poor professional performance? Someone who desperately needs a win to create a way out. Valeria stayed in silence for 10 seconds. Ricardo Amaral, she said. Who is he? Director, Main Independent. He should to preside over the CU Agreement Committee. I restructured the committee 6 weeks ago and I removed him from the presidency, she continued. 6 weeks ago, the same amount of time as third quarter review, he noted. Diogo, he didn't need to say anything more. The architecture of betrayal had been built in. Oh, there's someone at that meeting of... What council will support you? He asked. 2 members, possibly 3. So, don't call the meeting today at night. She began to object and he continued. If you call them now, she's reacting. You're agitated. It's late. You're at a disadvantage. He had weeks to prepare for this. You had 40 minutes. Give yourself 12 hours. Get the trading data. Have the legal department pull up the history of transactions and then enter that room with the certainty that makes people who they're hiding something. They're sweating before you say it. 1 word. The restaurant was more empty. Paulo Vandali and his colleagues, they were. The sommelier was restocking. A cart near the bar. Outside, the avenue carried the particular movement from the end of the night in Natal, decided and without haste at the same time. Oh, why are you helping me? Valeria, he asked. Did you help Lorena too? Can I get the tiramisu? He said. It's the least I can do. She almost laughed. This surprised her. She postponed the meeting. From the council to 10 mm next, I told Marcos to schedule it as a strategic update mandatory. She didn't spend the night sleeping, but working. What was it for Valeria Horta? A state that he understood it better than sleep. How surgeons work before a complicated procedure. Map the line. From time retroactively starting from Reuter's publication. Pin dates in wall of his office. On the 3rd floor, Carla from the legal department managed to... Ricardo's transaction history, a mural at midnight, and the bill for his wife's brokerage firm had executed a short position in H.A. Lyos shares for the 14 days. Not Ricardo's account, but from the wife, through a managed fund by third parties, clean, careful, almost untraceable. Valeria spent the next hours building the presentation with Carla, Marcos and a forensic accountant named Gregory, in who trusted completely. He worked while the city expanded, under the glass, thinking about what Diogo, he had said. Don't react. Prepare yourself. And at 9:45 in the morning, she was in the bathroom, feminine, and looked at herself in the mirror. Suit grey, hair tied up. Someone's face who had decided that she had been afraid that night previous for about 20 minutes, and that was enough. Fear was useful for 20 years, minutes. After that it became noise. She thought briefly about Eduardo and the way he had rested his head on Diogo's arm for 3 seconds. He entered the meeting room at 10:00 a.m. Right on time. There were 9 people around. The Ricardo Amaral was sitting at the table. His usual position. He smiled when she went in, left his smile to stay there hanging in the air. He opened a meeting without preamble. Last night at 9 p.m., Rita's published internal documentation of our 3rd quarter review. It has begun. Valeria, I want to talk about how it happened. And what are we going to do? Respect. I also want to talk about withdrawal from Stonegate, which was timed before this publication. She clicked on the first slide, and I want to talk about a range of sales options of actions by H.A. Lyos, executed 2 weeks through a fund managed by Northern Capital, which deals with accounts of several families represented in this. The room absorbed this in silence. Sepulchral. Richard's composure. Amaral went from being practiced to being maintained. There was a technical difference that Valeria, I had learned to see. These options, she continued, were placed by a registered account in Vanessa Amaral's name. She looked at Ricardo for the first time. Good morning. Ricardo, Valeria, I haven't finished. He held his gaze. The notification to the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's being sent now. I want to be clearly. The fiduciary integrity of this. The advice remains intact, and our response will demonstrate this to the market before today's closing. She closed her folder. Ricardo, you will be escorted to outside this building. At the end of this meeting, your personal items will be boxed and delivered. But if you have something to say before leaving, the time has come. Now, he had nothing to say. No one else spoke. Valeria finished meeting, looked out the window at the city, and sent a message saying that it had worked. Diogo replied that Lorena had seen the news and asked if her company did robots. A few weeks later, the actions Helios recovered and Valeria, she began to better balance her work. With time spent with his son Eduardo, learning even the breathing exercise that Diogo had taught. On a Saturday, in November, she took Eduardo to the park of the dunes, where Diogo and Lorena they were waiting. The children began to chatting animatedly about a sag, while Valeria and Diogo watched in silence. She admitted she didn't know exactly what I wanted for the future, but I was sure that how much Eduardo had changed, and that I admired the kind of father Diogo was. For Lorena, as Valeria always, Diogo organized everything in his life. He suggested something simple, setting up meetings, Saturday mornings in the park, and let the rest of the way happen revealed over time. They walked along the trail at that moment, Lorena held Valeria's hand on one side and Diogo's on the other, with a child's naturalness. Valeria, she realized the simple weight of that little thing. And understood that moment it had nothing to do with business or success, but with something much more true. Eduardo observed the scene with relief and slowed the pace so that they stayed together. Then they had ice cream and went back home. Eduardo practiced the breathing that she had learned, and while Valeria was taking notes in a notebook, your new plans, pass more time with your child, accepting calm and not fear the slowness. That same night, Diogo was reading to Lorena before going to sleep, reflecting on how destiny brings people together unexpected ways. Over time, we learn that life is measured by speed or by achievements, but because of the bonds we've created, because sincere presence alongside those who we love and for the courage to slow down, to listen to, care for, and value the small moments that really give meaning to existence.